segue into what I am going to be saying, because truly, right now we do live in a medical dictatorship, and the government is not only telling us what drugs or treatments we can and can't use, but how we can feed our children, educate our children, how we can live our own lives, what foods we can eat. Every aspect of our life the government is trying to get involved in. Sorry, Sista, could I possibly ask for the slides on the screen? Thanks. So I've titled this talk, Australian Government Vaccination Policies, Coercion and Bullying. And what the government is doing right now, and I don't think this is actually an exaggeration, but what the government is doing right now could be compared with what the German government did in the 1930s and the 1940s. The way that they are treating us, the wording that they are using when they discuss people who make decisions, whether it be about vaccination or cannabis. I mean, there are a whole range of issues that fit in really well with the vaccination debate. Other than cannabis, there's fluoride, there's natural therapies. I don't know if you're aware, but the Australian government right now, through the NHMRC, which is one of their bodies, is trying to close down 17 forms of natural therapies, including homeopathy, Bowen therapies, acupuncture, Chinese medicine, not to allow us to use these many times much older, safer, more effective treatments for our own families. And to me, that whole issue is that we have the right to make decisions about our body. When I talk about vaccinations, I have made a choice not to vaccinate my children due to my own research after my son was vaccine injured in 1989 and then again in 1990. So I made a decision for my family not to continue vaccinating, which I think is a pretty reasonable decision, because if something is harming your family, I think if you keep doing it, you are going to be not just criminally negligent, but incredibly stupid. And, you know, I may not be the smartest person in the world, but I'm not a moron either. And I think most of the parents who have chosen not to vaccinate their children have either done so after someone that they love has been adversely affected, or they have done hours, weeks, months of research into this subject and decided that for their family, the risks of vaccination strongly outweigh the benefits, and that is their decision. So vaccination is not so much a medical issue as it is an issue of human rights. Do we, as citizens of a supposedly democratic nation, have the right to make basic choices for ourselves and for our children? And I think the answer must always be yes. So I'm just going to do a brief introduction of the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network. It used to be called the Australian Vaccination Network. Michael is right, the AVN. I founded the organization in 1994 because I felt that it was incredibly unfair for people to be targeted and for parents to be making decisions about a medical procedure without getting enough information to make that choice the best choice they could make. So from the very beginning, we gave information that was sourced from medical journal sources, from mainstream sources, and also from alternative sources. A broad range of information, because this is an issue that has a lot of pluses and minuses depending on who you listen to, and we felt that it was unfair for parents to be making decisions for their minor children or for themselves without having all of the available information on board. So we basically started out as an information and support body and very quickly moved to becoming a lobbying group. In 1997, we were told that the federal parliament, thank you. We were told that the federal parliament was going to be passing legislation making it impossible for parents to choose not to vaccinate and still send their children to child care and still get all of their government entitlements. And with a group of 3 other women and absolutely no experience whatsoever, we got on the phone on a Friday night. By Monday morning, we'd raised $2,000. We flew down to Canberra and we lobbied federal parliament, and we got the conscientious objection clause entered into federal legislation, so that from that point in 1998, when the law was enacted, until January 1st, 2016, when No Jab, No Pay came in, parents were not able to be discriminated against on the basis of their vaccination status. And I'm very proud of that. I'm very proud to have been part of that. And I think that the reason that we were so successful as three very inexperienced, and when I'm telling you inexperienced, we didn't even know that the Senate and the MPs were different. You know, honestly, we knew nothing. But we managed to get support from Parliament, and we managed to get this legislation through. And the reason I'm sharing this story with you is not to say how great we were, because we weren't. We just did what needed to be done at the time. But we find ourselves, as Dr. Catalara said, at a time of great medical tyranny. Our government is not free. Our country is under the thumb of corporate interests that honestly do not care if we live or die. And as a result of that, we must do again what we did in 1997 and 1998. And small numbers or not, I truly believe that when you are fighting for what is right, you will always win in the end. But you must never let fear stop you. You must always get out there and fight for what you believe is right, because nobody's going to give it to you, not in this government. Next slide, please. And I apologize for using slides. I know the previous two speakers didn't, but I tend to run on a bit, and the slides keep me on track. If you ask my husband, I could stay here for 7 hours and not stop talking and have no problem whatsoever. No jab, no pay, no jab, no play. A lot of people wonder why the heck the government named these laws those words, those exact words. In 2013, the Murdoch media, the Daily Telegraph, the Courier Mail, the Australian, started a campaign to stop families who had chosen not to vaccinate fully or not to vaccinate at all from going into childcare or from getting their government financial entitlements. And less than a year later, the government picked that up and said, we're going to pass legislation called No Jab, No Pay. They couldn't do No Jab, No Play because laws governing preschool and childcare are state laws, but they certainly could take care of the money that parents are getting or not getting as part of the family, they used to be called the family allowance, now it's the family tax benefit Part A and the supplement. And we, as the Australian Vaccination Skeptics Network at this point, went to the Senate and the MPs in Canberra, and we pushed really hard, and we got a Senate inquiry into No Jab, No Pay. More than 4,000 submissions were sent to this inquiry. I testified at the inquiry, as did the AVN's president, Tasha David, and Greg Beatty, who was our past president. Of the 4,000 submissions, we are told that only a handful were in favor of the legislation. And even government authorities said that they did not support it because the information that it was based on was fallacious. It was not, they were basically saying that unvaccinated people are putting the vaccinated at risk, which when you think about it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. But also the information that we have in the Australian Childhood Immunization Register as to who is and who is not vaccinated was so wrong because doctors had done such a piss-poor job of entering this data, a job that they were getting paid for royally. They were paid extra to actually enter this information. At least 50% of it, we were told, was incorrect. So regardless of anything that they were told, regardless of the fact that most of the people on the Senate inquiry didn't even have the decency to show up and listen to the people who testified, the policy passed into legislation on the 1st of January 2016. So in Australia right now, if you choose not to vaccinate, you will not get your family tax benefits supplement Part A, which is the end of year payment, which as of this year, nobody gets anymore anyway. But the government is also taking $28 per fortnight per child away from any family that has not vaccinated fully. To me, this is not only blackmail, it's bigotry. We would not allow the government to say that any child that is black, any child that is disabled, any child that is of a certain religion should not be getting these payments. So why do we allow the government to say that children who are perfectly healthy and whose parents have made well-informed choices about a medical procedure that carries with it a known risk of lifelong disability and death have to suffer as a result? And the worst thing is that the people who are targeted by this legislation are not the broad society as a whole. They are only targeting people who are in a lower socioeconomic status. So if your income is below a certain amount, you will suffer. If your income is high, you won't even know this legislation exists. Next slide, please. Yes.
It seems that the children that are not vaccinated are the ones at risk. Why? I don't understand.
I understand your question, and it's a logical question. For those who couldn't hear, the question was, aren't the children who are unvaccinated the ones who are at risk, so why the problem? And the problem is the myth of herd immunity. Now, I don't want to go into this too long because I've got a limited amount of time, but the phrase herd immunity came about in the 1930s when studies were being done to find out why diseases were cyclical in nature, why you would have a measles outbreak, and then you would have 3 or 4 years without an outbreak, just sporadic cases, and then you'd have another outbreak. And the researcher by the name of Hedrich studied measles, and he said that when you had a certain number of children who had not had measles naturally, because there was no vaccine back then, you would have an outbreak, and then most of the children in the community who were susceptible would have gotten measles, and then you'd have a period of time without an outbreak until you had more children who were born, and they would be susceptible, and then you'd have another outbreak. So the term herd immunity, or as I like to consider it, herd mentality, never had anything to do with wiping out diseases or protecting the community as a whole. But about 15 years ago, governments around the world, all at the same time, decided this is a fabulous concept. We can use this to not only encourage parents to vaccinate more fully, but to point the finger of blame at the unvaccinated in the community for starting outbreaks, even if they themselves are not sick. And whooping cough is a perfect example of this, because in 1991 in Australia, 71% of children under the age of 4 were vaccinated against whooping cough. I mean, if we had a 71% vaccination rate right now, there would be alarm bells going off everywhere and emergency signals. But we had 71% vaccinated and about 350 cases reported nationwide. In 2011, when our vaccination rate in that same age group was very close to 95%, we had over 38,000 cases of whooping cough reported nationwide. So an increase of almost 25% in the vaccination rate led to a 10,000% increase in the incidence of disease. Herd immunity is a lie, it is a myth, but it is being used to inform government legislation that discriminates against perfectly healthy children, that says that they are not entitled to school, that they are not entitled to preschool. Sorry, not school, not yet. That's coming down the track. But it is saying that our children are somehow less important, less of a concern than the children of those who did the right thing and vaccinated. And the fact is that most of us did the right thing, and our children suffered as a result of it. I don't consider myself an anti-vaxxer because what you do is totally your business. I could not care less. As long as you make an informed choice, make it your choice. But I am an ex-vaxxer because I saw vaccines affect my family, and I don't want that to happen again. I take responsibility for my own family, and my decision has no effect on anyone else's health. Thank you. So this is just talking about the Senate inquiry that I've covered already. Gotta get over here, sorry. Next slide, please. This is the Senate inquiry in 2014, and as I said, 4,000 submissions, very few of them in favor, but despite that, the legislation passed. No jab, no pay came into law on the 1st of January, and in Victoria, no jab, no play came out at the same time, and that basically said that if you were a child care center in Victoria and you you could not accept any child who is not fully up to date on their vaccinations. If you did, you had a very high fine, and you could, lose your license to have a center as well. So this is government overreach of a kind that I don't think we've seen in Australia before. And the vaccination issue, I believe, is a testing ground, because if we will allow this sort of legislation that discriminates against perfectly healthy citizens conducting their lives in a way that is legal, if we allow this to happen, then the government will say, okay, we can take any rights away, and they will just sit there and let us do it. Next 2 slides, please. That slide that just went by, it's out of date, so I apologize. These are the laws in Australia as they stand. If you would like to know the current state of legislation regarding vaccination, go to avn.org.au, and at the top of the page there's a link for laws that is updated regularly, because there are many, many more laws coming in. And this is South Australia. South Australia a few months ago said that they were going to be looking at no jab, no play. And they said they were going to be having a public inquiry and wanted people to write in and tell them what they thought. But if you're anti-vaccine, we don't want to hear from you. So the government said, we really want to know what you think as long as you agree with us. Basically, that was it. So South Australia has not yet passed no jab, no play legislation, but we believe it's on the cards in the future. Next slide, please. This is a letter that I just got sent to me. This is a copy. Now, I don't have the actual letter here because the quality was really bad. It was scanned at a very low resolution. But Malcolm Turnbull wrote a letter to every state premier back in March 2017 before the COAG meeting, the Commonwealth Heads of Governments meeting, where they were going to be discussing no jab, no play. As I said, that is state legislation, not federal, so the government couldn't do anything about it. And what Turnbull said is that they are aiming for 100% vaccination. So they don't want anyone to have an exemption. And he even said in the letter that conscientious reasons are not valid reasons to choose not to vaccinate. And he said that he wanted child care centers and preschools to be transparent, a very different use of the word transparent for me, because his version of transparent was that, that the child care centers and preschools would actually release how many vaccinated and how many unvaccinated children there were in that facility. And his reasoning was so that parents could feel safe sending their children there. Now, if vaccines work, and the government is saying that they do. I mean, we have the Victorian Health Minister saying there are no adverse reactions to any vaccine. She literally said that, no adverse reactions. So they're safe. And the government is saying that they are the best way of protecting our children and ourselves against infectious diseases. So answer me this. If you believe that and you vaccinate your child, why would you not feel safe sending your child to a child care center with someone who is not vaccinated? They should be protected, right? Shouldn't the vaccines be protecting them? And if the vaccines are not protecting them, then why the hell are we using them? It doesn't make any sense. It's not logical, it's not scientific, but it is government policy. Next slide, please. Back to Malcolm Turnbull, my favorite Prime Minister. Malcolm Turnbull, Australia, the United States, most European countries are corrupt to the core. Is this a surprise for anyone here? I don't think so. Okay. Malcolm Turnbull trades his own shares. Usually an arm's length arrangement is put in place when someone takes public office. And I don't know how many of you remember a couple of years ago that the Premier of New South Wales had to resign because he got a gift of a bottle of wine and didn't declare it, and he was forced to resign. Malcolm Turnbull, depending on which media report you look at, owns between $100 and $200 million worth of shares in GlaxoSmithKline. That is just one vaccine manufacturer. We believe, from reports that are in the media, and again, this is just our belief, we don't have the ability to see this. Most other countries, these people have to release their information, not in Australia, that he owns shares in other pharmaceutical companies. But what we do know is his wife, Lucy, his loving wife, Lucy, is the chairman of the board of a company called Prima Biomed. Now, Prima Biomed is a company that has strategic partnerships with many vaccine manufacturers and is working on a new form of HPV vaccine, which is the Gardasil vaccine. But this is going to be a different one. Lucy's shares, prior to the introduction of no jab, no pay, according to the media, were valued at about $750,000. Within 6 months of the passage of no jab, no pay, those shares increased in value to $5 million. Now, I think we should be asking the Turnbulls for some investment advice because they're doing a really good job. Of course, the fact that they are the ones who make legislation might have something to do with it, but that would be a conflict of interest, and I don't think they would do anything that would lead people to thinking they had a conflict of interest. Do you? I don't think so. Next slide, please. So not only do we have a prime minister and many people in government, both state and federal, who are making money from corporate interests while they do not protect the lives and health, well-being, and rights of Australian citizens, but we have government bodies like APRA. Now, Dr. Catalaris can tell you about APRA, so can Dr. John Peace. How many of you here have heard of Dr. John Peace? Yep. Not many, I'm surprised. Okay, he is a general practitioner with more than 40 years experience who was practicing in Victoria until recently. And what Dr. Peace did that is unforgivable is that when parents came to him and said, my child had a reaction to a vaccine that nearly killed him, that made him unwell for a long time, Dr. Peace was writing medical exemptions for these families so that they could be exempt from further vaccinations and continue to send their children to preschool and childcare and continue to get their government payments. The government said, hold on, we can't have this. We can't have doctors writing medical exemptions using their 40 years of experience to say that this child is at risk, because then if we do that, other people might think their children will be at risk from vaccinations and the whole program will be at risk. So it's better to have the children at risk than it is the program. And so Dr. Peace has been suspended. His office was raided. All of his patients' files were taken, and he is not allowed to practice medicine. His patients are left without a doctor. Dr. Catalaris, I believe, has also been suspended. He may even have been deregistered. I'm really not sure. But this is the way the government controls people who do not toe the party line. If you have a policy that is not backed in science, a policy that you can't uphold by simple discussions and debates, by evidence, by data, then the only way that you can implement this policy is with threats. And the only way that the medical profession and the other professions that are under APRA, which is nurses, chiropractors, homeopaths, well, I don't think naturopaths, but homeopaths, that you can possibly defend your rights is to get together and unite against this tyranny. 1 or 2 of you are going to be cut down. Hundreds of you, they can't do anything. And that is going to be the only way that this solution is going to be found, is if people unite, and especially practitioners unite. I have not seen a doctor myself for over 25 years, except for broken bones, and I have never felt better for it. And I will protect my practitioners in any way I can. But my practitioner also needs to step up and protect himself, and I think that's what needs to happen. We need to have groups formed from doctors who believe in patients' rights and practitioners who support real health, not drugs. Next slide, please. Sorry, next slide. I've already talked about that. Now, the policies that are happening in Australia are happening all around the world. We are the test dummy for the rest of the world. And I say that, I really say that because I feel that we are the test dummy, just like the dummy that sits in the car when they run it against the wall to see what's going to happen. Well, we are that test dummy. And what happens here happens overseas, in California, in Italy, in Poland, in New Zealand now. And they're going to have a fight on their hands in New Zealand, because I've got to tell you, the Kiwis are not going to sit still and let this happen without making some form of protest. So we really need to understand that what is happening in Australia is part of a global agenda. And that sounds all conspiracy-based and everything. And you know what? It is conspiracy-based. It is a conspiracy. It is not a conspiracy theory. There is a conspiracy to control our rights, to take away what we can and cannot choose to do. And the sooner we understand that, the better it's going to be for all of us. Because the government can only do what we allow them to do. And if we don't allow them to take away our rights, then we will finally get the government that we need and deserve instead of the government that we've elected, which does not represent us. Next slide, please. Okay, I'm going to take this out here because I wanted to read this. You probably can't see it. This is what's happening in Australia right now is something that has been done in the UK some time ago. In the UK, the smallpox vaccine was mandatory for many years, and I'll talk a little more about that in a few minutes, but it was mandatory for many years. But not only was it mandatory, if you did not get your children vaccinated against smallpox, you could go to jail, and you would be fined. So again, if you could pay the fine, which I think was 20 shillings, then you wouldn't go to jail. So the rich people didn't vaccinate their children, but the poor people did. And this is from East Croydon, which I'm assuming is someplace in the UK, and it says that there were thousands of vaccination summonses and also abortive sales. Now, I think an abortive sale is like a bankruptcy sale, and that people had chosen to go to prison rather than have their children vaccinated and pay the fines. This is exactly what No Jab, No Pay is. If you go to the AVN's website, avn.org.au, and look under No Jab, No Choice, you will see stories from parents who have chosen to have abortions because they can't afford to have another child if they can't work. Parents who are now living in their cars because they can no longer afford their mortgage or rent. And parents who are going without dinner themselves 2 to 3 nights a week so they can afford to feed their children. This is Australia. This is what we are allowing to happen. And the AVN and many other groups around the country are trying to help these families now. We have food donations. We have toy and clothing exchanges. Because what we basically believe is that if the government is giving us money, then the government can withhold that money and make us pay. But if we are reliant on ourselves and on our community, the government has no power over us. And I think that's what we need. Next slide, please. So we as a community need to protect each other, not the government. This slide, we are told all the time, it's the mantra, vaccines save lives. I did a talk at Woodford a few years ago, and they won't ask me back there again because they got so much flack. But I taught there for 3 or 4 years running, and the last year, the Australian, a group called Stop the AVN, whose whole reason for being is to stop us from being able to exist, they hired an airplane to fly over the venue where I was speaking at with a tail that came out and it said, vaccines save lives. This is the mantra that we are told all the time. We've got to keep vaccinating because vaccines save lives. Measles kills millions of people every year. Whooping cough used to kill millions. Now it doesn't do that. But where is the actual evidence? Next slide, please. The slides I'm going to be showing you, the next 3, are from a book called Fooling Ourselves on the Fundamental Value of Vaccinations, and it's by Greg Beatty, who is a statistician, and he used to be the head of the AVN. And all of this information comes from the Australian Bureau of Statistics and the Australian GRIMS book, which looks at deaths from all reasons in Australia. Now, this is the graph for measles deaths going back to 1870, and as you can see, a lot. This is per 100,000, so almost 180 per 100,000 people died from measles every year. It was quite a big killer. But you'll see that by 1965 and 1970, the death rate for measles was effectively 0. There may have been 1 or 2 deaths, but there was virtually no deaths from measles in Australia. And in 1970, what did we do? We introduced a measles vaccine. Why? If measles was not killing people, were we introducing a measles vaccine? I'm going to be 60 years old next year, and I remember clearly my mother putting me in the room with my sisters when they had measles. There was no fear. There was nothing except a desire for me to get it and get real immunity to measles. And now, people are being told that measles is a killer. But according to the information that we have, that's simply not true at the time vaccines were introduced. Next slide, please. This is a similar situation from the same book. This is whooping cough. Now, we did start to use a vaccine in the mid-1940s, and then we used the current vaccine when mass vaccination started in 1953 in Australia. And as you can see, the death rates from measles had declined by well over 90% in the 100 years before the vaccine started to be used. So again, why are we saying that whooping cough vaccinations save lives? If people are going to be making statements like that, shouldn't they have some form of proof? Just being a doctor is not good enough. I don't think so anyway. Next slide. Now this is a good one, because this compares measles and scarlet fever. The dotted line is... Thank you. The dotted line is measles, the solid line is scarlet fever. And scarlet fever used to kill more people than measles. So it was quite a deadly disease. The only difference is we've never had a vaccine for scarlet fever. And as you can see, except it hasn't gone on the screen. Sorry, Sista, can we get the next slide, please? That's great. As you can see, the decline in deaths virtually mirrors the decline in deaths from measles. So without vaccination, now scarlet fever is a bacterial disease, so antibiotics can be used to treat it, but antibiotics didn't come in until the mid-1950s into mass use, so antibiotics had nothing to do with this. What really caused this decline, and this is not a matter for dispute, if you speak with public health officials, better hygiene, better nutrition, better sanitation, clean water. Those are the things that lead to declines, precipitous declines in deaths and morbidity from infectious diseases. If we were spending the billions in developing countries, in Africa, in Asia, on food, water, and good living conditions that we're currently pumping and wasting on vaccines, we would see these exact same declines take place there. But pharmaceutical companies don't make money off of healthy people. Sad but true. There is no profit in health. There is a big profit in illness. If you can keep people ill enough so that they continue to use your drugs, you're on a winner. And if you can mandate that everybody has to use a certain drug or else, then, I mean, that is a business plan made in heaven for you. Business plan made in hell.
You can't sue them.
Well, that's in the United States, in 1986, legislation was passed saying that pharmaceutical companies could not be sued for any harm. If they put arsenic in their vaccines and they were found to put arsenic, you could not hold them accountable. The United States Supreme Court has said that vaccines are unavoidably unsafe products which cannot be made safe for their regular use. So we are being told that we have to give our children and that we have to take ourselves vaccines that are unavoidably unsafe. I don't think that's a real winning proposition. Next slide, please. Now, this is smallpox. This is from a book called Dissolving Illusions. We've sold out of this one. Every time we get it in, we sell out within a matter of days. It's by Dr. Suzanne Humphreys, who is a brilliant researcher. She's also a medical specialist, and she did a lot of study on the safety and effectiveness of vaccines. Now, these are deaths from smallpox in the UK going back to 1849, it looks like. It's a little bit blurry, but those arrows point to, the first arrow on the far left points to when smallpox vaccination became compulsory in the UK. The second arrow is when the compulsory vaccination laws were made stronger, so it was harder to get out of vaccinating. And I think you might notice that after the laws were passed that made vaccination compulsory and also that made it harder to get out of it, there were huge jumps in deaths from smallpox. And this has been the experience worldwide. Smallpox itself was declining in virulence before the vaccine came in. And then when vaccination came in and became used on a mass basis, we had huge increases in deaths and disability because of vaccination, not because of smallpox. Next slide, please. This is something that I get all the time. I am fully vaccinated and I'm perfectly healthy. Yes. I was born in 1958. That schedule on the far left, 1960, would have been what I got. 3 vaccines. Now this is American vaccination schedule, but it is almost identical to the Australian vaccination schedule. We use 2 doses of measles, mumps, rubella before the age of 3. The Americans use only 1. And we do not use hepatitis A unless you are a Aboriginal or Torres Strait Islander descent, where the Americans use that on all their children. Those are the only differences between our schedules. So in 1960, there were 3 vaccines. 1983, 24 doses. 2016, 69 doses. So yeah, I had 3 vaccines and I survived it. I got sick after a tetanus vaccine when I was in my teens. But as a child, as far as I know, I didn't have any overt reaction to 3 vaccines. But if I was faced with 69 vaccines, could I say the same thing? Why are we seeing today that in Australia, half of all children are being treated for at least 1 chronic condition? Why do we see 1 child in 21 being autistic? Why do we see such huge numbers of behavioral and developmental delays in our children? Why are we seeing chronic disease going off the charts? Asthma, eczema, food allergies, environmental allergies. Are vaccines causing all of these problems? I believe they're contributing to it. There are other causes as well. Overuse of antibiotics, overuse of pharmaceutical drugs, our really disgustingly poor diet. And all of these other things contribute to children who are just not well. We don't even know what a well child is anymore. When my daughter had to go to the doctor at the age of 7, and the doctor pulled out her file, and there was 1 piece of paper in there that was from the day that she was born, and he examined her, and he said, "She's never had antibiotics." And I said, "That's right, she's never had antibiotics." And he said, "Well, that's not right." And I said, "The fact that you're saying that's not right, that's what's not right. This is what a healthy child is like." So, okay, next slide, please. It's very important to me, and hopefully to you as well, to know what you can do. Because we are in a very difficult time. We are in a time where the government feels that they have the right to tell us exactly what we can and can't do. And I've got to tell you, I've heard that in France, the government is afraid of the people. But in Australia, the people are afraid of the government. And we need to be more like France. Great cheese, too. So, people power. We shall overcome. Martin Luther King Jr. is one of my favorite figures. And he, I think, sets a prime example of how you can win by nonviolent resistance, by civil disobedience, by being activists. We need to be activists. We don't need more people to sit in the background and say, "Woe is me." We need more people to step up and say, "It's not happening to me because I'm not letting it happen." Next slide, please. In Europe, this picture is taken in Italy. Every week they had millions of people protesting in Italy against mandatory vaccination. Mandatory vaccination laws passed anyway, but what's happened is one of the northern states in Italy is now taking the federal government to court over mandatory vaccination. And that would not have happened without these mass protests. Next slide, please. This is Poland. Same thing. Every single week in Poland, they have mass protests against mandatory vaccination. Not against vaccination, but against being told that you have to vaccinate. Next slide. This is Brisbane. And we had about 1,000 people there in Brisbane at the rally that we held last year. 1,000 people. There should have been 100,000 people. But people are afraid to come out and say that they support human rights. And what I'm saying is, if you are afraid to come out and say you support human rights, you won't have any human rights. It's time to get over that fear. Make the government afraid of you, not the other way around. Next slide, please. This is Leicester in England. It's an artist's rendition. In 1885, during the time that policy for mass vaccination, for mandatory vaccination was strengthened, without the internet, without newspapers, without anything, 100,000 people descended on the government offices in Leicester, England, and protested against mass vaccination and mandatory vaccination, and the government changed the policy and removed the law that made vaccinations mandatory. We shall overcome if we get together and we are smart and we are dedicated and we are united. It's going to work. We just have to do it. Next slide. Thank you. I'm almost at the end, guys. Thank you for being so patient. Those public rallies are really important. Really, really important. I can't, describe how important they are, but they are not the be-all and end-all. And I got to tell you, I talk to so many people who say, I'm really active on this issue. I'm on it every single day. Where are you on it? On Facebook, on Twitter. Yeah, great. That's fantastic. It's really good to get the information out there, but you've got to get your butt out the door, and you've got to start seeing your members of parliament. You need to bring other people with you and make delegations. I will go with anyone in the local area if they want to speak with their member of parliament, because sitting on your computer and being a keyboard warrior is only going to be good for your circle. You need to actually get to the people who are making the decisions. We have spoken with 100 politicians, and I can tell you we only got that Senate inquiry because we got off our butts and did it. And one thing that we are told all the time when we go and see politicians is, you're the only people who are expressing any concerns about this issue. So if you're the only people, why would I do anything? We need to show them that whether you believe vaccinations are good, bad, or indifferent, you are going to support the human right for everyone to make these choices for themselves. So please, I beg you, make an appointment with your local member of parliament. If they say they will not see you, go to their office and sit in their waiting room. Tasha and I just did that in Queensland on our way back down from the Vax tour last week. We just went to people's offices and sat there and met with their advisors. And we left them information on our website, avn.org.au. We have a lobbying pack. You can print out information from that pack and take it with you. You can inform these people. They have children too. They want to know what's happening. Some of them are not corrupt, and they need to hear from you. So really, please, if you could do that, that would be great. And the other thing is, if you have someone who's been affected by vaccines in your family, get your phone out, get on Facebook. This one you can do on Facebook. Get on Twitter, get on Periscope, film your story. Use the hashtag Vaxxed, hashtag Vaxxed, V-A-X-X-E-D, and tell your story. The government is saying that we don't exist, that our children don't exist. We need to show them that that is not true. Now, on that note, I would like to ask everyone in the audience who knows someone who's been seriously injured by vaccines or killed by vaccines, would you mind standing up, please? Thank you. Look around the room. We are told that vaccine injuries affect 1 person in 1 million. And if that were the case, there would not be 1 person standing in this room. Instead, there's 20 or 30 standing. You can sit down. Thank you. Be aware of that. Because we are voiceless in the media and in the halls of power, many think that we don't exist. But we do. And we need to take our voice back. We need to be strong. We need to actually be telling our stories. Out at the table outside where the AVN has its books and DVDs, there are adverse reaction report forms. Can I ask everyone, if your child's reaction or your reaction or the reaction you're talking about was never reported, please pick up one of those forms and fill it in and send it back to us. Thank you. Next slide, please.
Support your rights.
Sorry?
That one?
That's the one. Thank you. And that's almost the last slide, Sista. Thank you. By the way, I have to tell you I am in total awe of Sista, because I don't know, those of you who are watching the speakers this morning, no matter what they talked about, she put something up on the screen behind that would describe exactly what they were saying. Amazing. Absolutely amazing, Sista. Round of applause for Sista, please. Just incredible. So, the AVN. Now, the AVN, we've had 15 government investigations against us in the last 5 years. And we've been told that the New South Wales government has spent in the tens of millions of dollars trying to shut our tiny little organization down. They've actually changed state law twice to try and get us, and we're still here. And we're not going anywhere. We are not going anywhere until this is done. And I got to tell you, I hope it's done soon because I want to have a life. I really do. But we're not going anywhere until this is settled, and we could really use your support. Membership is $25 a year, and again, on the table, there are membership forms out there. If you can afford it, great. If not, go to our website and sign up to receive our free newsletter. We need you to know this information. We need you to be aware of when actions need to be taken. That is free. Sorry?
Really great newsletter.
Oh, thank you. Thanks for that. So, yeah, go to our website and sign up. There's a form right at the top. Like our page on Facebook, it's at avn.org.au, and on Twitter, it's at avn_choice. And put your name down to be involved in one of the local groups that are around here. There's a fantastic Healthy Lifestyles Naturally group that does amazing work. Again, at the table, you can just put your name down and we'll put you in touch with the group. And report vaccine reactions, so important. The government can only claim vaccines are safe because most reactions never get reported. Can you have the last slide, please? This is something, how many of you have seen the documentary film Vaxxed? We actually showed it here last year. Yeah, it is a great movie. Thank you, Sista. In Vaxxed, one of the parents says, one day everyone will know the truth about vaccines, and that is what I feel like. This little girl is one of Tasha David's daughters, the president of the AVN. Tasha has 8 children. 6 of them have been affected by vaccines. 3 of them are autistic. They have all sorts of behavioral issues, ADD, ADHD, speech disorders. Her 2 youngest are completely unvaccinated, never had a course of antibiotics, never even been to a doctor. And this is the experience of so many people. My own family, my 2 oldest are partially vaccinated, sick. My 2 youngest, not. They are very healthy. And we're our own control groups, Tasha and I, and this is the experience many people have when they have multiple children and vaccinated some and didn't vaccinate others. This is not a scientific study. This is our experience, and to me, that is more valid than almost any scientific study that is funded by the pharmaceutical industry and put up there to make people think that vaccines are safe and effective for everyone. Because I can tell you that there is no medication that is one size fits all, and vaccines are no different than any others. So please share the information you've got today, unite with others to bring about change in the community, and be strong and be brave and be together. And thank you so much.
Thanks, Meryl. She's a woman. So, Zane, are you here, Zane? If he's not here, we're on to Michael. I've got about 4 or 5 more speakers. Where's Zane? Here. We want him up here. So, Zane turned up helping us in the Hemp Embassy a year or 2 ago, and he's a herbalist and healer and healed himself. He's got an extraordinary story. He needs hours to talk to you. He's got about half an hour. He's a champion.
Good afternoon, everybody. 11th the 11th, a big day for all our veterans out there. I hope we all took a moment and just said a remembrance and thought of people past and all that. As Michael said, my story has been a bit crazy even since I was a child with health and things like that, and that's what led me to be where I am today as a nutritionist and a herbalist, and a bit of a voice for natural medicine, and also a bit of a voice for cannabis in the way of treating a broad spectrum of diseases as we're learning. And I just want to touch on the previous talker with the vaccinations and vaccines. We are really at a time in the next 2 decades if we keep up the vaccinations, where we're going to have an epidemic. The amount of children and teenagers, babies, that we're seeing with things from the vaccinations is getting very scary. I've had a 14-year-old boy had his recent HPV vaccination, and he was top of the class, young Japanese boy. After the vaccination, he's totally finished. He can't go to school, he can't coordinate anything anymore. And 2 weeks ago, I had an 18-month-old baby. For the last 6 months, post her 12-month vaccinations, she hasn't stopped crying, and she's not the same baby. So that's better?
Yeah, all good.
So it is very real, and you know, if we don't make